Welcome to Salomon Farm Park. Here at Salomon, we rely on the help of over 100 volunteers to keep our farm park running and beautiful. Today, with the help of Terry and Julie from the Flax and Fleecers Spinning Guild, we're going to give you some tips on how to dye fibers naturally.
Well, Julie, today let's dye some onion skins. I think it would be a great way to introduce some people to dyeing, and it would also be a great way to show some of our experienced dyers ways that we can expand and explore the colors that we can get using different methods of dyeing with onion skins.
Okay,
So,
what are we going to dye, Terry?
I think today we'll dye some wool. First of all, we have to scour the wool, so we have to wash it in a neutral kind of a soap to get every bit of dirt and some of the oils that were used in processing and combing the wool out so it's nice and clean. What kind of soap do you usually use when you do this?
I use a soap that's made especially for wool, but I also sometimes use my dishwashing soap that has no dyes, no perfumes. You want something really simple.
That is pH neutral kind of a soap, yeah. So then when we tie, we have to tie this skein together so that it doesn't all come apart and get tangled in the dye pot. And so at several places we're going to put some ties. Now when I tie it, I have to be very careful not to tie it tight, because if I were to pull the threads tight, it would make a little resist, and so the dye wouldn't absorb well under the tie, and we would have a tie-dye hank of yarn. And today I don't want a tie-dye effect. I'd like everything to be pretty even. And now this is almost ready to go into the water. How's the onion skins coming?
Well, I have a lot of onion skins here. So, we also need, we've got the onion skins and we need some water to cook them in. We're going to make an onion soup with the inedible parts. You ready?
Yeah, sounds good.
Today I'm using the tap water, and at home I use well water. My well water has iron in it, which will change the color of our dye. And sometimes if I don't want that effect, I will put a bucket outside and collect rainwater. Now that's pretty good. So now we have to put it on the heat. For how long?
Usually when I do onion skins, I'll simmer them for about an hour, and then I'll strain it off and go from there. Okay, so we've got this all tied and ready. What are some of the things we need to do to this before we put it into the dye pot, Julie? Can you remember some of those things?
We want to soak it, because you talked about tying it loosely so that it won't tie dye. The other thing that will stop it from dyeing evenly is air attached to that, so we want to soak it in water. And again, you choose your water.
Okay, so we've got some
We've got
soaking
some
here
already
already.
soaking.
And so we'll just leave that soak. We want to soak it for a good half hour or so it's nice and evenly moist before we start to dye with it. So there are other things that sometimes people do to prepare this for the dye bath, and a lot of times it does always depend upon whether the dye is an adjunctive or a substantive dye. Whether the dye material is something that the fiber will absorb on its own, will bond on its own, or whether it needs a little help. And onion skins happen to be one thing we can use, and with wool, we put the wool in there and it's going to bond to the wool without any help, and it's because onion skins have a little bit of tannin in them. So any substance we use that has tannin in them tends to be able to dye without any help.
So Terry, our dye pot is ready with the onions and the water.
Okay, and we have one that we've made ahead, and it's been cooking for about an hour now, so we can kind of look at that and see what it looks like. The color is nice and amber. So while we're letting this cook just a little longer, do you want to talk about the mordants?
Yes.
Okay.
Now's a good
Let's do
time,
that.
and I'll put this one away.
Okay, let's get some more.
All right, so Terry, let's start with the alum.
Okay.
alum is a really interesting chemical. I really love it for a different variety of different reasons.
Yeah. Oh.
So it looks like salt, and it is a salt. It's a metal salt of aluminum, and there are a couple of different kinds that we can use. This one is especially for using with fibers. There's another alum salt that you can use for pickling, and if you want to, you can use it for dyeing. You might not get exactly the same results, but you can use it. So that's why is that your favorite?
It's my favorite because it seems to be the safest. I don't like, there are other mordants. We can use like iron and tin. When I first started dyeing back in the 1980s, the dyers would always use a powdered chrome and a powdered tin. I think over the years we've come to realize you've got to be very careful with inhaling any of that powder. So I've just totally moved away from anything except alum, unless I just happen to use a metal pot, a copper pot or an iron pot. So I like it for safety, and I like it for the colors. I get enough colors out of it that I'm happy with alum.
And alum will brighten your color usually. We also, so Terry talked about iron, we've got sort of a simple iron bath here. There are rusty nails in there, and the rust and the iron and the oxygen go into the water, so we can add a little bit to our pot if we want to sadden the colors. It makes them a little duller, makes it different. Iron also can eat away at your fibers, so you want to not use too much. It's an experimental type of thing. Now this is a really interesting one, Terry.
It's been soaking for a little while there. All the copper I could find. I've got copper tubes and copper wire and little copper pennies in the bottom. Copper tends to make things turn a little towards the green side.
Okay.
To add them and either add them to the dye pot or after something's been dyed to dip it in a little bit.
Oh, that's right. We have a friend who really likes to do an after bath with the copper. We could do the same with the iron.
Right.
Now this here is not really a mordant. This is citric acid. So your citric acid is going to act like vinegar and make the pot more acidic. Wool fibers especially love to be in a slightly acidic bath. When you're dyeing cotton, you want to go more towards the basic side. So you might put in some baking soda or some washing soda. So we could have 5 skeins in here to start out with. We could take one out, and then we could put a little bit of citric acid into the pot, and then take another one out, cooking them each a little bit, and then we could put some iron in, get a different color every single time.
Right, and I've done a lot of shifting with making it more acidic or more base, and a lot of times what I'll use is just that little dribble of vinegar in a rinse water after I'm done, or a little dribble of ammonia, which is the base, after I'm done. And one fiber, I dyed wool in a tea of purple basil. And I love that because the purple basil, when I dye it with my regular hard well water at home, will turn out a little bit on the pinkish side. It's not a grand color, but if I put a few drops of ammonia in a water and then rinse my little pinkish, somewhat blah yarn, it turns out a beautiful green. One of the most beautiful greens I can get. And green is so hard to get in nature because there aren't many of our dye stuffs that we can get a green from, and this is one way I found to get a beautiful green. So definitely shifting the acidity or alkalinity of the pot or of just the rinse water afterwards is going to make a big difference in what color you're going to see, along with doing the different after mordants. So lots of fun things we can do. Okay, Julie, I think our pot is finished, and so why don't we strain it out and see what we've got here. And that's the one thing when you're dyeing, there's some safety things to be aware of. Certainly we want to use only dye pots to dye in. We don't want to use them to cook in, because especially if we've added those mordants, we don't want that stuff in there. And certainly things are hot, and so we've got to be careful that way. Okay, that was good. All right. Oops.
Okay, so I've got my wet wool, skein of wool that is loosely tied, and I'm going to do something that I like to do. I like to put it in, and then I like to bring it up right away. Now, obviously the dye has not soaked in, but you can see a difference. You can get an idea of what it might look like. So we put it in and we let it cook.
How long do you think you let it cook? What do you
Well,
usually
at
do?
least half an hour simmering.
Okay.
And there are some dyes, this is where you need to do, one of the places where you need to do research, because some dyes, you can boil them in your pot. Some dyes, you need to keep it just a little bit cooler, and if you boil it, it will go brown. So that's a good thing to look up.
Like madder root, and madder root one is one I know for sure. If we boil it, we're gonna lose that beautiful little orangey red and it goes brown. Black beans, if you don't use any heat, if you just in a cool water, soak them like in the refrigerator for a couple of days, gives you the best blues. So it's definitely good to have some resources, like there's tons of dye books out there, or just Google. You know, there's a lot of stuff on how to dye with onion skins, how to dye with marigolds, you know, and you'll get ideas so that you'll know the temperatures and length of time, anything special that needs to happen.
If I want something fairly light, I'll simmer it for half an hour and then I will rinse it. If I want something darker, I might simmer it for half an hour and then let it cool down in the pot and sit all night. I do that fairly often. How do you get your darker colors?
I leave it sit overnight. I think that's
Okay.
I haven't found any dye stuffs that I can't let sit overnight. And I think it just intensifies the color, makes them a little more fast and permanent. So I like doing that. Okay, so this is going to take about 30 minutes to cook. So while we're waiting, why don't we talk about some other things we can get our dye teas?
Okay. All right, Terry, you have dyed with dandelions. I dyed these up this morning from my yard.
Okay, so yep, a dandelion is an easy way to start dyeing too, because they're real prevalent right now. And when I dyed this fiber, I just took off the blossoms and the leaves and made a dye similar. I just put a whole pot full of these things on the stove with water. I cooked them for an hour at a low simmer and then strained them off. The fiber that I used, I did pre-mordant with alum. The dandelion, if I would not have used the alum, it would have faded right away on my fiber. So this required an alum rinse before I dyed. So this is what I got. I dyed some yarn, and I also just dyed some raw mohair locks. So dye can be attached to the fibers either before they're spun, after they're spun, or like you did with the cotton after they're woven.
Right.
So what else do we have here?
Well, the thing is that there's more to the dandelion than just the tops and the beautiful flowers. There are the roots, and I have read, but I have not tried it, that the roots will give you pink. However, that means you've got to dig them up and wash them, and so I haven't tried it yet. But there are other plant parts too. So you can see there's a lot of color in these corn husks, and it's in the corn cob. And you mentioned black beans. And then we've got some bark and for some wood, the heartwood is a different color. So Osage orange, heartwood is brilliant yellow. And here we go. You've used apple bark, haven't you?
Yeah, apple bark,
And
give a nice
then
orangey color.
we've got the lichens. And lichens are really interesting. Well, lichens and other mushrooms, there are certain mushrooms, if you soak them in ammonia, instead of this kind of beigey, yellowy color, you'll get brilliant magenta.
I haven't tried that. I have to try that.
They don't grow so much around here. They grow a lot in the Pacific Northwest, and lichens grow very, very slowly, so you have to not harvest all of the ones that you find.
And there's different varieties of lichens. I know this is the kind I usually get around here. It's on the tree, and it's it shows really brightly after a rain. You'll see the bluish green along the tree. And I know different kinds of lichens might die of different colors, and kind of the same way with if I dig a dandelion today, it's spring. If I dig it again in the fall, I may get a totally different color doing the same method, because the time of year we harvest things, the soil that it's grown in, they all are variables that'll make a shift in the color, just a little bit of a shift, but an interesting shift and fun to play with, that's for sure. All right, well, should we go back over and see if our pot is done?
Let's check it.
See what's happening here. So, okay, it looks like our dye is taking up. Now this has only been soaking, what has it been?
Half an hour.
Or not even quite, maybe. But yeah, so we're starting to get a beautiful yellow color. I think we'll leave it soak overnight and come back and see what we get in the morning. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
Okay, let's see what happened here overnight.
Whoa.
How about that? I think it took up a lot more color.
It did.
Got more into that rusty color. Love it.
And if you want, you can weigh out how many onion skins. A lot of natural dye books say 4 ounces of dye plant for 4 ounces of wool. But it's all sort of guidelines.
It was a lot of fun to just play with it, see what you get.
All right, this has been Julie and Terry from the Flax and Fleecers Guild from Fort Wayne. And if you want to know more about spinning and fiber arts and dyeing, come join us on the second Tuesday of every month. Check on our Facebook page to see where the meeting's going to be. Recently we've been on Zoom.